Today is January 12th, 2023. My name is Dr. Jason A. Higgins. I'm a historian currently at Virginia Tech, and today I'm in Blacksburg, Virginia. Joining me for an interview remotely from his home in Wyncote, Pennsylvania is Ari
Merretazon.
Merretazon. Thank you for that. Again, formerly your previous name was Haywood Kirkland. Historians might recognize that name from the book Bloods by Wallace
Well, both
Terry.
names are in the book Blood's title of the chapter.
And you are a Vietnam veteran,
I
a
am.
formerly incarcerated veteran, and
I
an
am.
activist for justice.
That's correct. I'm a reparationist as well.
For justice and reparations.
That's right.
Do I have your permission to record this interview
You
today?
have my permission, Jason.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And this is the second interview. This is a follow-up interview on 2 days ago, January 10th. We talked about your childhood, your parents, what it was like growing up in Washington, D.C. And then we talked about your experiences in the Army and the Vietnam War. And whenever we ended, we were talking about what it was like coming home. And I had a couple of questions to follow up from that first interview.
All right.
Have you ever been diagnosed with PTSD?
Yes, I have. 100% disabled veteran.
So
PTSD.
you have service-connected disability benefits through the VA.
That's correct.
Do you recall when you first got those benefits?
Yeah, it was a struggle. It was a struggle. In fact, maybe about 10 years ago, I decided, well, I was representing the Point Man Soldier Heart Ministry. I was at the district office of Congressman Joe Sestak, or former Congressman Joe Sestak at the time, and his director was a Navy veteran, and the president of my organization is an Army veteran, First Cav, and I'm a veteran, 25th Infantry Division. And so we went around the table talking about whether or not we had benefits or not. Both of them was 100%. I'm the only one that's sitting at the table without any type of benefits from the VA, because I spent all my life assisting others. I didn't feel a need for those benefits. I didn't feel a need, but they was my property, and that's the concept I use to apply for my benefits. That they're my property. I signed on the dotted line for honorable period of service. Now I'm applying for my benefits, and it went just like that. I was less than a year, and that's real good for the VA, you know. And I think it had something to do with the interview I had, because at the pension hearing, there was a Quaker who interviewed me. She was a Quaker, and she took 15 minutes to talk about a Quaker family. And so I knew I had someone that pretty much was balanced in their thinking around what's going on in the world. And I just told her what was happening to me, and we agreed that I had anger from having to fight two wars, one in Vietnam, and then the whole racism in the military, you see? And then, of course, the racism that current day out here that I've experienced since the discharge. And, she pretty much did the diagnosis pretty good. I was comfortable with her diagnosis. PTSD for anger. And the anger is attributed to having to fight two wars in Vietnam. That's what my medical race, she got the language right. But having to fight two wars while I was in Vietnam. One against the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese, and the other against the racism in the military.
Right on. And so last our interview, we were talking about what it was like coming home from Vietnam. And I did have a couple of follow-up questions about your time in Vietnam. And I'm curious about drug use in the military, whether or not you partook in any kind of drug use while you were in Vietnam, or how
I
readily
smoked
available.
marijuana when I was in Vietnam. I mean, when I was in base camp, like everybody else did, all the officers and everything else. When I came out of the field, that's when I first started smoking marijuana in Vietnam. When I came out of the field and was performing security duty for the command post at LZ Baldy, and so I wasn't in the field. Let me be clear about that. I was out of the field at base camp, in the most secure area of the base camp, where all officers are, in the command post.
Did you continue to use after the military whenever you came back to
Yeah,
Washington,
every now and
D.C.?
then, yes. Hmm.
Okay. And 1968 is a little bit early for heroin to be readily available in Vietnam. But were you aware, were other soldiers able to get a hold of heroin in
I don't know.
1968?
I was a combat soldier now. All my stuff was out in the field. My whole time was in the field. But I understood around 1968 when United States government realized that black soldiers coming home, they're coming home and they're armed or they're fully trained in combat and war. And so my thinking was that there was an explosion of drugs in our community, especially starting out there in California. And that blew everything up. I wasn't involved in. I was a service person who tried to assist those who were tied into those drugs and try to get them off the drugs, not through any type of counseling, drug counseling, but through just gaining their benefits. Because I thought that if they had their benefits and the people that they have around them, their family, whatnot, that he or she may very well move away from that. But that wasn't my problem. My encouragement to them was get off the drugs, right? Go, stay in let the VA go deal with the VA, let them put you in the drug rehab center, and and move on. If that's what you want to do, if you don't want to do, you're gonna be on the street.
So what you're saying is that in your time as a veteran advocate, you had encountered a lot of other veterans who
Oh
had
yeah,
substance use
absolutely,
problems. Okay.
absolutely,
All right.
absolutely, and we did a great deal of getting them out of that poison dynamic. At least here in Philadelphia, those who are member of our organization and those who we've provided service to, that was not a member of the organization.
I applaud those efforts.
I appreciate that,
I
man. It was
yeah.
real. The family issues come in with the drugs. Everybody. Then that's that. Once you get into that drug thing, the whole family is involved, and then whole community, your job, workplace, and all that type of stuff. And so we had a great time. We used to have rap sessions. We still use the old Vietnam rap sessions in our group. And so when we go around, we able to determine who's who and what they're doing and stuff like that because we ask direct questions, and we can cooperate them within the group. And so it was a nice way of growing together and getting individuals to handle their individual problems, whether it be domestic, drugs, unemployment, you see, or mental issues.
Did those types of rap sessions, and just for anyone who's listening, a rap session is whenever veterans are talking to other
That's
veterans,
right.
right?
There you go.
Were those happening while you were incarcerated as well?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's how I was able to set up the Incarcerated Veterans Assistance Organization by organizing veterans first and engaging them in the discussion of what possible the things that we could do and the property that we own if we apply that we own, but we have to apply for it. And there was no bar to us being incarcerated in receiving the benefits. But now, since that resource of veterans benefits to incarcerated veterans, there's been a major change because they set up what the VA subsequently set up a Department of Incarcerated Veterans Affairs, right? And I think that's all out of my work, right? That's what the record shows. And
Yeah.
go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that's really the central topic of conversation that I want to talk about today is how you got first started organizing incarcerated veterans, how you testified to Congress, and I'm
Mhm.
presuming that was while you were
No,
incarcerated.
that was after I was released.
After.
The testified before the Senate, U.S. Senate, on the
Okay.
readjustment
So
problems of Vietnam veterans.
so let's take it from the point of first coming home from DC, your involvement in the criminal justice system, and then how you got to this point in I believe 1979 where you're testifying before Congress. So let's tell that story today. And so I want to kind of go back to 1968. I want to go back specifically to April and May of 1968. You're coming home from Vietnam. Dr. King is killed. And then there are riots all across the United States. Can you tell me your memories of those moments?
Very traumatic memories. There's a lot of trauma going on with that happening because while in Vietnam, the Bloods of Vietnam, distinct from any other veteran, the Bloods of Vietnam was basically those brothers who was tied to their peoplehood and wanted to fight for each other. They knew that we had a common bond. So coming home, and my arrival in D.C., I mean, D.C. was on fire, And so I went and I stayed with my mother and father for about a month. And I then enrolled in a computer operator school and got ripped off. My benefits got ripped off by the thing. The institute closed down and what have you. And at the same time, I was involved with working with the post office, the main post office, now known as Trump International Hotel. And I stayed there I worked there for a year before I found out the connections that led to the robbery that didn't put anybody's life in danger. That's what the record says. So we did that. I was working in the post office and found out through my relationship within the post office how money was being transported from Germany here to the United States.
So to slow down a little bit and dive a little deeper into this, you described that coming home as very traumatic.
Yes.
Washington, D.C. is in flames, as well as a number of other cities.
Yes.
And I'm curious about, how did the killing of an icon of nonviolence, of civil disobedience — he was an anti-war activist, he was, an organizer against poverty — how did that affect your own ideas about the United States?
Well, you have to go back to the short time, my last 6 months in the war. That's when the black soldiers really came together. And we really understood we had a common bond, and we understood what was happening in Vietnam in terms of black-white relationships. We always received the bad end of the deal, the worst jobs, the last to be promoted. Even in combat, when you clearly can be seen that you made some heroic act, right? That should have been acknowledged, and they just don't do it. They give you a little commendation medal, stuff like that, but it has to be very obvious, and the black soldier had to be, totally put his life on line for the whole period of that particular battle, So, although, and look, the black soldier in Vietnam was very heroic. Don't let anybody tell you that they weren't. They were not. And some of these military pictures, Army pictures, Vietnam movies, show them in a cowardly mode, like Platoon. And platoon, for me, was reflected in my recon platoon because it was the same division, 25th Infantry Division. And we was a headquarter platoon. That means we went anywhere where any 25th Infantry Division action was or any soldiers were. And so that, for me, coming home had that traumatic effect. I understood that D.C. was on fire. Martin Luther King had got assassinated. Other cities was on fire. And I needed to take a step back. And I stayed with my mom and dad for 30 days. And then I went and enrolled myself into a computer operating course that flim-flam and took my money and ran off, closed down, and all that type of thing. And
whenever you first came home, Ari, and you were interacting with your mom and dad in that 30-day interval,
yeah.
How did you reconnect with them? Was it difficult?
Well, first of all, they say you have totally changed. We really, you're not the Ari we know, we're not the Haywood that we know. And I said, yeah, that's the Vietnam War. And so as I began to stay out of that type of environment, like spending that time with my mom and dad, not going out at all, and I think it took me about 30 to 45, maybe 60 days to really get back into, now I'm ready to apply for a job, go out there in the society and work and be a member of society. And so I applied for the job. Well, the D.C. government offered me, gave me a choice of either becoming a police officer or working in the post office. Well, police officers too much like war, right? And I was done with my whole war thing. I wasn't contributing nothing to any type of war dynamic. And the war was on black communities. And so I couldn't participate in that. So I went on rolling in the post office. Worked there. Did
you feel somewhat disconnected from the black community whenever you came home, having served in the war? Was there
I was disconnected. I was actually disconnected because nobody was talking to me. It was just me. and my readjustment issues, right? Which was anger, and the anger was not at anybody but the federal government. My anger was because of I had to fight two wars in Vietnam, one against the Vietnamese and the Viet Cong, and also the North Vietnamese, rather, and the Viet Cong, and and the racism in the military in Vietnam. I'm not going to attribute everybody who all these soldiers who ended up in the stockade in Vietnam, Long Binh jail. 95% of that Long Binh jail population was black soldiers. Now, there's something wrong with that, and so we all knew what was wrong with that. It was just racism in the military. You get the wrong end of the stick, you get the bad end of the deal. And so I came home understanding. In fact, the group that I was with, about 4 or 5 brothers, we was basically talking to each other about what we was going to do when we got home. We knew that we were going to come back and help our communities out. And so we used to talk about that. We used to reinforce each other about that. And so, when I saw an opportunity to do that, that's what I did. I got back involved in my community, all the cultural ass things of being a descendant of African slaves in the United States. And I went on and worked for the post office for a while. And during that dynamic, a year period of working for the post office and my reconnecting with my culture and the community, I saw an opportunity to bring some resources into the community. That was the Dead President piece, right? And so, but prior to the Dead President's deal, I made a good adjustment. I was part owner of a business, a club called African Hut, 14th and U Street. Somebody who's watching this may end up and know about what African Hut, and surely they know about 14th and U in Washington, D.C. So I did that, and while working at the post office. So I'm now part owner of this club, working at the post office. I'm still mad because the computer place ripped me off of my money and whatnot, and the Computer Institute. And so there, while in the post office, I learned how packages was traveling, from international ports back to the United States. And so that's what brought about the whole Dead Presidents thing. And I want to overly emphasize this, that there was no killing, shooting, nobody's life was put in danger. And it's all testified, not by us, but by the guard and the driver. They testified their lives were never put in danger, right? And but you see how they characterize it. And they had to characterize it because it was the largest armed robbery. It really was an armed robbery. It was the largest robbery in the history of Washington, D.C. at that time. And so they had to do something for the public to be, they had to do something publicly to assure the general population in D.C. that that we had been captured and went to trial and in prison. I was sentenced to 10 to 30 years now. 10 to 30 years. But, what happened was that revelation I received when I was 10 years old said I was going to war in prison for 5 years. My work in prison allowed me to come back before the public. They could access the work that I was doing with veterans in prison. And when I went back before the judge for a time cut, he had no problem with giving me a time cut. In fact, when he reduced my sentence, my sentence was 10 to 30 years. When he reduced my sentence to 6 to 30 years, I had already served 5.5 years at that time.
And this is a different judge from the one you first faced.
Yes, absolutely.
Prison, right?
Absolutely.
I want to talk about that a little bit more because I was very interested in Bloods, where you're talking about the trial, and you said that the judge was a World War II veteran.
Yes, he was,
and that he didn't understand doing what you had done as a veteran.
No,
Can you talk about that? Like, where does that divide come from?
Well, it's generational, I think. If he was a World War, I think Korean or World War II veteran. He was a veteran, I know that. And so it's generational. Vietnam was unlike any other war. It still is today. And the ramifications of participating in that war is monstrous, because a lot of families, veterans, were impacted because there was no assistance for us when we came home. We had to advocate and get in the street for ourselves and demand that PTSD, those things that we experience, and those flashbacks, those types of reactions, be in the medical diagnostic manual. And we were successfully in doing that. And look, that was one of the biggest things I participated in, to be an advocate in the front line before Congress to make sure that our PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome, was a part of the diagnostic manual. And that was a big success for us Vietnam veterans, because now all veterans now can participate. All veterans can relate to the diagnostic manual now.
Right, right. At that time, it was called Vietnam stress syndrome, so it would have been a Vietnam generational thing. I don't want to go back too much, but the post office. I want to talk more about that. That's a good job. That's
It
a
was a great
federal
job,
and in a time whenever a lot of veterans were not getting good jobs like that. I want to explore more about this idea of giving back to the community that you mentioned. You wanted to give something back to the Black community, and you did that outside of the legal system. What led you to that decision? Because, I mean, if you had just settled into your role at the post office, you could have had a good career. And, tell me more about that.
Well, I
What
wasn't
led to
wired
that
that way.
decision?
I wasn't wired just to be a postal worker. I understood that, and what I tried to do is I tried to find other things to do within the post office. My initial job in the postal was just sorting mail, sitting on the stool sorting mail with first sergeant behind you, telling you, sort it faster, that type of thing. And so I made some networks. Any post office in this country, there are very solid social networks there. People relate to each other in all types of group activities. And so I met a few people inside the post office, been there much longer than I had been. And we talked. In fact, one or two of them we came together to open up this club called African Hut. And so we used to talk about what's going on, how the whole system, postal system worked. And some of them was in position to know the flow of money coming from different forts, right? And this one was coming from a military fort in Germany, right? And we was told about it. And the people who told me was the folks was either the driver or the guard of the truck. No, it was the driver of the truck, of the mail truck. That's how we got it into it, right? That's how the knowledge passed on to me through those friendships. And you see that in court, they testified their lives were never in danger, right? And I don't think the government did any real investigation because it was such a high profile robbery. That's all it was, a mail robbery. It wasn't an armed robbery, right? They testified in court that their lives were never put in danger, you see? And so that was big because it was the biggest thing that happened in Washington, D.C. in terms of illegal robbing, the robbery, right? And so we did that. That came out of my frustration of being involved in the community, working with various types of cultural organizations. I was a member of the Temple of Black Messiah, where the Reverend Ishak Musa Barashango was the pastor, also known as John Wayne Marcel. And so, I got into my culture. I got into dealing with Black folks all day, trying to help out with the problems they was having. And so with that energy in me, and then finding out that how the money was being transferred back to the United States, then I thought it was a great opportunity to grab some resources and put those resources into our community.
I want to talk about that a little bit more because in Bloods it talks about you donated some of I think it was like $320,000 total that was robbed. What specific organizations did you donate that money to?
Well, at the time there was a student medical center at Howard University. So we gave them some money. We gave the Temple of Black Messiah some money. We gave the Capital East Businessmen Association some money. So we was doing those types of things with the resource we had. And then there was this one of the participants decided to just start throwing money anywhere. Now the places that we was giving money to, they had the wherewithal to clean up the money, right? Where one of the actors on my side of the fence, he start passing money all out in D.C., New York, California, and all that type of stuff. And that's what led back to our capture, and incarceration. And so,
So, all right, but because that's federal money and you're trying to give it back to the community, did you see it at the time as an act of reparations?
yeah, absolutely. I saw it as an act of repair, right? The federal government is the major enslaver of descendants of Africans, right, here in the United States. And so I always been clear about that. I always been clear about blacks and white relationship in this country. And if you're not clear about it while you're in the military, you never get clear, you know. And all they promote that there's no racism in the military. If it is low and whatnot, don't believe that. And because they developed a system around it where those below the command can still engage in those type of relationships, denying promotions, denying good jobs or in the military or MOSs and that type of thing, promotions. And so my whole thing was like, here, I'm back, I'm ready to go back into the workplace now. I enrolled in school, hired at the post office, and I'm socializing with people at the post office. And I come to find out what's going on, right? And so I understood what was going on. I thought that I could make it happen. I could make sure that happened. Those resources come back to our community, and I did, without putting anybody's life in danger. It just was. It was a highly notarized. It had high social community notary about the crime. It was a high public. They thought somebody else other than black folks did it, right? That's really where it went down. Because it was nobody's lives was put in danger. The guard and the driver of the truck, they said they never, feared anything. So it's all based on what I found out about the sources of monies coming into the post office in Washington, D.C.
So it's been a while since I've seen the Hollywood version of that story, but it doesn't seem to fit what you're talking
It
about.
doesn't. It doesn't fit. And look, when I went out to Hollywood to the producers' premiere, where all the producers come together and watch the movie and make comments or whatever, I stood up. I said, "That's not my story." I told them, "It's not my story." Then they told me, "We said it's loosely based on your story." And so that's how it went down. I took my position on that, and they took theirs, and we got along. I got paid. Obviously, they made about $20 million off the movie, maybe more now, because it's still, out there. So,
So for someone who's trying to understand the struggles of Black Vietnam veterans, how would you explain that difference between how Hollywood portrays it versus reality?
Well, you see, Hollywood usually very rarely show and depict blacks in leadership in the military in those movies. They either like maybe a squad leader or some lower level like that, down on the ground type folks. And even there is, really no real black leadership is allowed. And so, that type of thing just connected me with my readjustment problems. Because I came back home angry. I was angry when I came home because based on what I understood was happening, to the degree I understood it, it was enough my anger just exploded. And I said, I've got to do something. I just didn't feel right just having that presence again in my community and not doing anything, because in Vietnam, when we came out of the field, the Bloods talked about what we was going to do when we came home. And so I was committed to that. And I did something. And I was going to go out and let them know that I did my piece, right? And so I did that to a certain degree in terms of connecting with few of the veterans that came home with me.
Okay. And so let's talk about from the trial until your incarceration. What was that experience like for you?
Well, at trial, I didn't testify. I didn't get on the stand. No, none of us got on the stand. All right. And the lawyer's basic issue was to distinguish what actual crime was committed, whether or not it was an armed robbery or just a mail robbery, because the sentence structure is different for both. For mail robbery, which we actually did, relieving the custodians of the mail, of the U.S. mails, that's how it lays out in the statute, and that was a mandatory 5 years. You couldn't get no more than 5, but you had to get 5. And so they knew the crime was got a lot of publicity about it and what have you. And so the courts decided they were going to make an example of us and gave me 10 to 30 years. And so, I told you before that I had this vision from the Creator that I was going to go to war. Went to war, and I was going to be in prison for 5 years. And so while in prison, man, I stayed in Hope for about a year and a half of that time. But on an occasion when I was there, I realized that it was a losing battle for me to continue to go up against that system as one individual, because I was protesting everything as an individual, right? I wasn't cooperating with none of the system and the do's and the don'ts they was doing. So I stayed in Hope for quite a while, in and out. I wouldn't work. And they finally decided to say, hey, look, this guy's not going to do anything. This is a veteran, and so we got to be a little sensitive with him. And so when I came back out of maximum security the last time, they just, instead of putting me into one of the regular jobs like the print place, the print office, or whatever, I was able to manipulate the situation where I end up just being a custodian around the main office of the prison, right? I would just sweep up and what have you and that type of thing, or around the captain's office, that type of thing. And I loved that because it gave me all my independence. That took for 30 minutes. My day was totally mine from that point on in that incarcerated environment. And that's what every man in prison wants, being able to have his own independent space and time and not be hunchoed to working, whooped into working, demanding that you work. And there's no law that required us to work while incarcerated. At least it wasn't in D.C. So I said, look, I don't have to work. I came down to do my time. And that's the attitude I had for a while.
What prison were you incarcerated in?
D.C. Department of Correction. It had a facility outside of D.C., about 26 miles outside of D.C., called Lorton Reformatory, the infamous Lorton Reformatory. It's no longer existent. It was crazy. It's like being on the street. It was just like being on the street. Anything that you wanted, you could get. You could do anything in the penitentiary because it's an open dormitory type of setting. Yeah, except when you go behind the wall, which is maximum security. And so you could do anything in Lorton Reformatory. There's a lot of background information about that dynamic of Lorton Reformatory. And it was like 26 miles from D.C. And so it was close to home than most prisons. And so the last time I went to the hole, it dawned on me my status of being an honorably discharged veteran, and that I could use that to organize around. And they would have to respect my organization, organizing around Veterans Affairs in prison, what we call Incarcerated Veterans. I set up an organization called Incarcerated Veterans Assistance Organization.
Quick follow-up question, Ari. So I'm really interested in the effects of solitary confinement on human beings, but it seems to me that if you're dealing with undiagnosed trauma and PTSD, you would survive the Vietnam War. That would be especially hard to deal with. How did you survive or cope with a year and a half in the hole?
Now, this year and a half over different time frames of that 5 years.
So right? Not at the same time.
Not totally a year and a half in the hole, right? It's about 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. That was the RAM. And I spent about, over the 5 years, probably about a year and a half in the hole. So I realized I was working against myself, right? And I realized that now, when I came back out to the general population, I realized there was other veterans, other Vietnam veterans. 25% of Lorton Reformatory was veterans, right? All right, and so I decided to organize them. That's in my blood. And so I organized them into what we call the Incarcerated Veterans Assistance Organization, and was approved by the VA. We had an office approved by the VA inside the prison. And for that development, I was acknowledged at the White House by Jimmy Carter, with Jimmy Carter doing the acknowledgement. All right, I think I shared a picture with you at the time. And so it was that type of commitment to veterans that I had, because, if we was in war together, anytime you're in war with somebody and they're on your side, and you all survived, there's a very close blood love bond, right? Bond. And so that's what happened, that's what the blood love is all about in the war. You're willing to die for the man next to you. Simple as
Now,
that.
were you organizing primarily with other Black veterans, or was it interracial?
No, well, Lord and Reformatory happened to be part of the DC Department of Corrections. It was like 95% black people locked up, black men locked up, very few white folks, right? And so it was just a place where blacks was incarcerated in DC, and it really wasn't like a lot of the cells. It was a dormitory environment. It wasn't like cells. The cells was all back behind the wall, maximum security. And so out there in that open dormitory, it was been crazy. I mean, it was all types of crazy stuff was going on. It was like being back in DC, because anything you wanted, you can get, you know? And that's what happened. And so I saw that dynamic, and I began to try to organize the veterans into a unit wherein that we could bring in outside educational institutions, and we did Federal City College and whatnot, Antioch School of Law, which I subsequently attended, and was ended up being, after I completed the 2-year course of as a legal technician, I ended up as the special assistant to the administrators, the manager of the law firm, right? Of the school. It was a teaching law school, right? That we provided legal service to the poor, right? Gene and Edgar Kahn was the deans at that time. And I was the special assistant to them, and I served as the assistant to the manager of the teaching law firm. Okay. So I was there on the dean staff. I was in all the meetings with the deans and whatnot, and, that type of thing.
So I'm really curious about this moment because, as you know, I've written a book about the history of incarcerated veterans. And what you're talking about is really the first time incarcerated veterans organized together and forced the VA to recognize disability benefits for incarcerated veterans. That had not been done before
Right.
you and this other group.
That's right.
How did that happen? How did you reach out to the VA? Was there a representative who visited the prison and tell me about the process?
Okay, well, it's a process. Law and Reformatory had this thing. We developed this thing about inmate self-help programs. It's part of rehab, and a lot of people's going out of prison for singing songs as choirs, inmate choirs, and whatever going out. All the actors, but there was a group called Inner Voices, I think. And they would do all these type of plays and whatnot. They was going in and out of prison. I said, hey, come on. If they don't going in and out of the prison, then we definitely should go in and out of prison. And so we ended up using the leverage of our veteran status to bring in, where everybody could participate, the Federal City College to set up a basic campus at Law Reformatory, where anybody could participate and enroll in the college. And so we did that based on the fact that the law said that with our benefits, that becomes your property, and that as a veteran, you're entitled to all these things, which is free education, stuff like that. And so it was on us veterans to make the contact with those higher education institutions, those apprenticeship training programs, those work release programs, and develop a relationship wherein we could, through engaging in education, end up in a better sort of frame of mind and be back into our communities as contributors instead of predators. Let me put it that way.
Sure. Just to get the specific dates, what years were you incarcerated?
From 1969 to 1976.
76. This is at the same time that the Department of Justice begins to study incarcerated veterans. So the first report was done.
Say it again. I didn't hear you.
This is at the same time that the Department of Justice does its first study trying to identify how many incarcerated veterans are in prison.
What year was that you found?
So they started the study in 1979, and they published it in 1980
Yeah,
or
you know what?
81.
That was because of the work he was doing in law reformatory. We raised a lot of hell. I mean, we got a lot of coverage in the Washington Post newspaper before we actually began to make that happen for veterans in prison. And so once we were able to get the apprenticeship training programs inside the institution, higher education inside the institution, then we had the foundation to apply for our benefits. You see? So that was the first thing for us, is develop the relationship with the higher education institutions and the various types of apprenticeship programs that was out there, and apply for our benefits and not for that type of training.
Now,
And
did you
that was
get full benefits whenever
unprecedented. That was
you?
unprecedented. Excuse me.
Absolutely, it was unprecedented. Whenever you actually got your disability benefits, was it full 100%, or was it a reduced amount out of that total? Like, I
Well,
think today it's 10%.
right. Let me tell you how that happened. I didn't apply for my benefits, for veteran benefits, until 2010. That was long after I was out of prison, long after I'd been in the parole, long after I finished my walking down 25 years on unsupervised parole. You see. And when I came out of prison, I was part of the staff of the Vietnam Veterans of America. I think we had an office up on 18th and K Street somewhere. And I was handling the incarcerated veterans part, right? Because that's the resources I connected with in my inside-outside approach in developing the organization. I had U.S. Congressmen as my outside coordinators, Ron Dellums, Bill Lawson, who was part of the president's staff. President at that time was Jimmy Carter. And Bill Lawson, the president's staff, came to visit me in prison because he thought it was such a unique thing to be involved in. He wanted to make sure he get as much exposure as possible through his responsibilities at the White House. And so we made it happen that way. It was just my conceptualizing the concept of inside, outside. The inmates going to deal with the issues on the inside. Our community and representatives going to make sure it happened from the outside in terms of setting up the structure for veterans to receive their benefits. And we were successful in that.
Throughout your work with incarcerated veterans, whether it be from the inside or the outside, what are some of the problems in trying to identify veterans in prison?
Say it again. I hate the last.
What are some of the challenges in identifying incarcerated veterans? Like, for example, it's difficult to know how many incarcerated veterans are actually in the system.
Well, but it should be a matter of record if they get all your intake information, right? Intake, family relationships and all that type of stuff, high school education and whatnot, veteran status. So veteran status is in the intake of processing inmates into the prison. They found out that. And so it's just whether or not the veterans themselves understand the relationship they have to this country, even as veterans. Even while incarcerated, there was no law that prevented us from applying for and receiving benefits while we was in prison. I mean, it was a straight relationship as if we were never in prison. But now there's a situation they kind of curtailed and put a lot of other different types of regulations around that, and which I haven't been keeping up with, so I don't know really what they all are, but they're there. It's not like when I was there. When I was there, it was just like any other opportunity. You roll into a higher education and you receive your benefits. That's all you had to do as a veteran. So the job was to get the higher education institution to enroll veterans. And so we invited them down. They set up a satellite campus at the prison. That was Federal City College at the time. Now it's known as University of District of Columbia. All right. And so once we were able to do that, then we started this whole concept of inmate self-help programs, where a lot of the other inmates who were like dealing with different other types of like the gospel choirs, acting, and all that type of stuff, they put together a little program. They always come to me to help them put the program together, in terms of objectives and missions and vision, all that type of stuff. And so we did that, and we had inmates going in and out of Law and Reformatory left and right. And it was a good thing. And some inmates, did things while they was out that got them locked up or got them another charge. But, nevertheless, I think that what we was able to accomplish there lasted for about 15, 20 years. You see? at least 15 years after I was released, you see. And so that was a nice support that came in from the community, because it was the outside community that really made that happen, because they started communicating with us. And once you're able to communicate with the outside while you're inside, then things should happen. If it's beyond your family affairs, right? You're dealing with institutions, you're dealing with your own personal vision of yourself and things that you want to accomplish. You want to re-educate yourself, et cetera, or retrain yourself. And so we brought all those entities into the prison. Apprenticeship training programs, higher education institutions, those types of things. So veterans in prison could start receiving their full benefits, and they did. But somewhere along the line, they said, well, we're not going to let them receive all the benefits while they're in prison. And they curtail a lot. They cut it down. Now I think it's somewhere 30. You might know it better than me now. It's about what? About 40% of the VA benefits now?
Last I read from one source, I don't know if it's universal, but 10%.
Yeah, see, there you go.
That's a lot.
Less. Yeah, but
man,
I mean, and we made that prison anew. We brought in outside folk in almost every aspect of life. You see, not the Veterans Organization itself alone, but other organizations decided to start putting together programs and whatnot. They came to us, find out how we did what we did. And of course, our veteran status, pretty much was the key thing, but there was a process of development, of organizing that we used, right? And being able to lay out a program and manage it through our commitment to be successful at what we're doing. That's what we did. And that effort carried my work to the White House of Jimmy Carter. I was acknowledged at the White House with Jimmy Carter and Bill Lawson. I hope Bill Lawson have opportunity to see this video, because he was my outside coordinator. He was a major piece. I don't think we could have done it without some real good, strong outside resources. And that's what happened. He was working in Jimmy Carter's White House. And so, Ron Dellum, he's a United States Congressman from Berkeley, California,
Was that before or after you testified to Congress?
I testified before Congress after I was released.
Okay. So you met Carter while you were incarcerated?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Can you talk about that? What was that day like? Like, how long did you interact with the president?
News got out veterans were organizing in Lord Reformatory. So that hit the Washington Post and all that type of stuff. So those who was concerned or had some responsibilities for veterans in terms of resource access, they made contact with us from that point. They came, they wanted to come down and visit, want to talk to us and whatnot, because veterans were going in and out of prison as well, because they was attending Federal City College, and we had a satellite campus inside the prison. So we had laid the foundation. And men who want to do other types of things other than, going programs and whatnot that serve the community, they would come to us and say, look, how you develop this program? Can you help us out? And I lay it out for them. They go get approval from the administration, and then they got their program going out, like Inner Voices is one, and that was a very notable group, because they did all types of skits and stuff like that about men in prison and whatnot. So that became very popular there in D.C. And so I'm glad I had the opportunity in being involved with them and setting the foundation of how to engage the system based on our willingness to give back to the system, even while incarcerated.
What was it like to meet the president? Was he supportive of your efforts?
Hey, man, look, I had my then what I had called my culture garb on, right? I had a nice top, dashiki type shirt, almost similar to this, but didn't have a collar. And then I had my turban. I used to wear my turban when I was in prison, right? Because I was part of a inmate religious organization called, and we call ourselves a religious organization because that's the framework that we had to submit ourselves to the administration to worship as we wanted to worship. And while in prison, I used to wear a turban, right? And I had to fight the administration for the turban. I made it a part of my religious attire, that they couldn't touch it, because of my religious faith. It's part of my religious faith, just like anybody else or other religious paraphernalia that other men have, that people out in society have. And so I took that position. I had to go to the hole for it. We went to the hole for about, 7 days. But I already had contacts. I already had contacts with outside. And so with that pressure I brought back in while I was even in the hole, that got us released from the hole. They the administration stepped back from us because while we were not the traditional religious organization, they had to acknowledge our right to believe. You see, our right to religious freedom. And we used that within our context of understanding the creator and the resources, the culture of our people. And we put together what we call this concentric order of Ma'at. And Ma'at is that supreme being principle that gives all light and love to the world. That the things that you do within Ma'at is to practice those principles so you can be a better person. A better person to your community, to yourself, to society, etc. And that give you the unadulterated truth about spiritual development. That you really didn't have to be part of religion to develop yourself spiritually. So we were not part of the religious organizations such as the Muslim, Morris Time Temple of America, the Christian folks, and Baha'i faith and all that. We claimed our own faith. And it took some real courage to do that because we had to educate the administration to, it's our religious faith, man. I know you don't understand it, but it's really, you don't have to. We're proclaiming it. And so we stayed in the hole for a while, and we made contact while I was at the hole to our folks, and we support out there, and they came in. And, the administration decided that, yeah, it's their religious faith. We can't do nothing. These men have to have the same access to our religious facilities that everybody else does. You see? And so that's how we made it. It was called the Concentric Order of Ma'at. And the Ma'at means truth and justice, right? And so on those principles of truth and justice, we developed what we call a minister of religion, a minister of philosophy, and a minister of science. I was the minister of science, right? And so that aspect was trying to show that what we do in the public domain, even while in prison, is a part of spiritual development. That's what we do. The concept, we can use those concepts that was espoused at that time to civilize the world into our own situation in prison. And we did. It was only I think we had no more than 6 members at any given time. You see? Because we weren't going the way that everybody else was going. We was understanding life from our own perspective, religiously, philosophically, and scientifically. And that's how we roll. And in fact, in terms of religious organizations inside of a prison, we kept the religious wars from going on, because we weren't tied to none of that. We weren't tied to that. We was tied to our personal understanding and confirmation of ourselves within the spirit of the Creator, right, and our ancestors. And so our doors were always open to all religious beliefs, right, and we showed them how it connected. And so at times when the religious wars were going on inside the prison, they called upon us to come in and intercede. You see, because we was a recognized religious organization as well in prison. And our thing was like, everybody could be a part of what we're doing. You had to take no vows to do anything. All you had to do is willing to follow the principles in respect to truth and justice.
It sounds like you
had laid it all out and whatnot as well. But I wish I had, my house got burnt down in Little Rock, and that's where I had all my prison stuff in, writings, poems. I was organizing. And so it was very easy for me to transition back to society. Because I was doing something while I was in prison that was improving and strengthening me educationally, spiritually, you see, and in a very practical sort of way. And was willing to and did explain to others, what that was all about, that they could do the same thing.
It sounds like you found your cause while you were in prison.
Say it again?
It sounds like you found a purpose in life while you were incarcerated.
I couldn't have done that without having understanding why I was in prison, based on my capacities and my willingness and my courage to do, And so that was very real for me. Very, very real, and very well respected in prison because it was all about all the inmates. We never tried to isolate ourselves from anybody, any other religious organization. We always tried to get them to come in, you see, because we felt that if we can get them to attend our sessions, they're going to have a better perspective of their own religions, you see. without all the religious trappings. Just straight up spirituality, and understanding that relationship.
I wanted to follow up. You mentioned that having this purpose helped you transition out of prison. Can you talk about that? What was it like coming home from being in prison, especially after being at war?
Yeah. Well, I had a plan of I already made my plan about what I would be doing once I was released. And so after I got my sentence reduced to 6 to 30 years, I had already done 5.5. And probably about 2 weeks after that, my sentence was reduced, I was in Washington, D.C., in a halfway house, right? And from there, from the halfway house, I went to law school, you see? And then after law school, started working like any other person would work in a particular field. My field was as a certified legal technician representing veterans before military review boards, in terms of getting their discharges upgraded and those types of things. Almost any administrative agency, that's about my whole heart of my work, my study in law school was administrative law. Dealing with those agencies, the first line of contact, really, before you go to court on matters of civil and social responsibilities and resources. And so, I mean, it was like, hey, I was just following what the Creator was telling me to do. That's what I did. I kept the faith. I practiced my faith so everyone could see it, attracted folks to it, solid men, and I've made contact with a lot of them, or at least a few of them, since being out. And one just recently passed away. I heard about it from a phone call from his sister, Benjamin Murdoch. Good brother, solid, highly intelligent, true to himself and to what he wanted to do in terms of readjusting himself to society. And so that's how we roll, and we stood out inside the prison, all right? And, but, we were the protectors, tell you the truth, of the responsibilities of the system relating to inmates. That every issue around every issue that evolved inside of the prison, we were part of it, if not leading it, or organizing it. And so our religious faith kept us totally involved with our whole environment and people around us. And we didn't push our religious faith on anybody. They had to come in and want to participate based on our annual or our regular Sunday services, right? Because the only time you had access to the prison chapel for inmates was pretty much on a Sunday, right? And then we was able to have it on a Thursday. That was major to have access to the chapel for inmate worship on a Thursday, right? During that time in 1969, something like that, 71. But anyhow, we put it up. I talk a little bit about it in my book, in my story in Bloods. My TBI doesn't allow me to really go into the details around it.
I understand.
But if I had the book, I could, reference something in my story would prompt things that I cannot recall on my own.
Do you recall much about testifying before the Senate?
Oh, yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Well, first we had to convince the Senate that it was an issue worthy of being a hearing to be held. So we did our work around the demographics of veterans in prison. We had a relationship with Congressman Ron Dellum. He was our outside coordinator, believe that. So we had a congressperson who understood what was going on, who was committed to assisting blacks in prison, right? And excuse me?
What was his name again?
U.S. Congressman Ronald Dellums from Berkeley. I think it was from Berkeley, California. Oakland, one of the two. And so through his largesse of being a U.S. congressman, and a very popular one, that we was able to move in and out of prison pretty good, right? And people from the president's office came down to visit us, And so that gave us a lot more protection around and freedom around to move within the administrative processes and procedures of the prison, you see?
So you were on the ground actually doing the research of finding out how many incarcerated veterans were in prison.
Yes, exactly. But first,
how long did that take?
Well, first I started with the prison I was in. I was incarcerated. So all we had to do is get the data on that, right? and then push that. And as it's pushing that forward, we found out more. We found out that almost every prison in the United States had like either way from 20 to 25% Vietnam veterans. So that talks about the readjustment issues from coming home from war back to society. And so when Senator Alan Cranston called the hearing on readjustment problems of Vietnam veterans, I was in the forefront of testifying for incarcerated veterans, the issues of incarcerated veterans, you know. And after that, the federal government put in place what they call the Vietnam Vet Centers, so that veterans can go and talk to each other and share their experiences or readjustment experience with each other. And I think it was about 14 was put online around that time, 1980. And I chose the farthest city I could find. I'm down south. I chose Little Rock, Arkansas, out of all the options where of cities that the vet centers would be established. And I chose Little Rock, Arkansas. I didn't want to go to D.C. I didn't want to stay in D.C. I didn't want to stay in Philadelphia because, you know, I didn't want to stay into the major cities because they had so much more resources, right? And I felt that based on my experience inside a prison with veterans and being a veteran, that the worst conditions of veterans exist in the South, in those southern prisons, Angola, you know, Arkansas State Prison, those type of things. Parchment, Mississippi, you know, prison farm. And so, yeah, so we did all that type of work to engage those. We used the administration of the Lorton Reformatory to engage those administrators of those institutions and set it up as an example of what they could do with the veterans in their prison. So we went that route, and we was very successful. In fact, even here in Philadelphia, the veterans out at, I think they put the name of this prison in Philadelphia. I can't get up the name of the prison here. But anyhow, I set up a Vietnam veterans, incarcerated veterans assistance organization there, and it come to me during the course of this interview.
Something. It's East something. What is it called? I know it too. I'm sorry. I can't recall it either.
Yeah, it all come back to me.
So to slow down for a minute, and to
down.
clarify, you're saying that the Vet Center is directly connected to your work around incarcerated veterans, because I understand that as Robert J. Lifton and trying to create these rap groups among veterans to be able to talk about the problems. So incarcerated veterans were part of that conversation from the beginning, it sounds like.
Along with Vietnam Veterans of America. They were like my outside supporters. Here I'm inside of a prison trying to set up a veteran service organization. Well, what's the best thing to do? You connect with the veteran service organizations already out there. And that's what we did. And they became our outside sponsors, Vietnam Veterans of America. You know, and so that kind of kept the wolves away from us, you know, because then we became a very public entity as a veterans organization inside of a prison, demanding the same resources that any other veterans organization would. And we, in fact, incorporated ourselves into a tax-exempt organization while in prison.
There's one kind of big question I've been having for years, and I came across something what you actually stated earlier, is that a large percentage of incarcerated veterans are Vietnam veterans.
Oh, yes.
That's been true from 1970 up until the most recent Department of Justice study, in which Iraq and Afghanistan veterans together now outnumber Vietnam veterans in prison 50 years later. Why do you think that Vietnam veterans are such a large group of incarcerated veterans compared to like 1% World War II veterans? It's like because 50%.
The social infrastructure, there was no social infrastructure for Vietnam veterans coming home, soldiers coming home from Vietnam. There was no infrastructure for that. They didn't understand what was going on with the minds, how trauma of war affected men, women long term. You see? And so we had to struggle with that just to get the PTSD into the medical diagnostic manual. I think it was DMS-4 at the time. It might be 8 now, something like that. But it was a big struggle, man. It was a big political struggle. And Vietnam Veterans of America was on the point. They engaged all the politicians, you know, and I was part of them in terms of handling the incarcerated veterans aspect of of veterans' experiences of readjustment. And so I was invited to testify before Congress. I think Alan Cranston was the lead sponsor of that hearing. And I think it occurred in like 1988,
79. Oh,
79, something like that.
so
But anyhow, you have all the dates. Yeah, but you have a better sense of the dates than I. And so, but Alan Cranston did it, and we testified, all of us from different aspects of veterans' experience. And then what came out of that was the Vietnam Readjustment Program, the Vet Center program, where Vet Center was established in all the major cities, right? Or all the cities that had a major, significant veterans population. And I knew that the work that I was involved in on the East Coast was solid as a rock. I mean, it was tight. We had access to the White House. We had access to all the political folks. So we putting that type of community pressure on it. And so when I had the opportunity to be, when the Vietnam Vet Center was open, of course, they invited all those advocates to be a part of working in those Vietnam vet centers. In fact, we demanded it. And so I chose to go to Little Rock, Arkansas, out of all those places, all the opportunities I had. And that was one of the best experiences I've ever had. Because I'm a frontline soldier in heart. I want to go where the worst problems are for veterans. And I did that. And so, but what had happened was, as the saying goes, I had a team leader who wouldn't allow me to go into prison to assist veterans. And that's where I made my name and exposed the problems of veterans in prison. And he would not allow me to do that. So I didn't stay there very long. I couldn't we didn't handle that relationship peacefully. We just decided that we could be antagonistic towards each other. So I ended up suing him, and I went on about my business, And
so I was laughing because I told you originally I am from Arkansas.
No,
right?
I didn't recall. What part?
Southeast Arkansas, Monticello.
Monticello. I know Monticello.
Close
Absolutely.
to Pine Bluff.
Legal service office was there. After I left the VA in Little Rock Vet Center, I ended up working for legal services, and because I had the legal service background. And so, but yeah, it's good to know. Thanks for that reminder. Monticello, okay.
So, Ari, I think that, we're going to have to do a third interview. And from that point, I really want to take it from, the 1980s.
Am I being helpful to your mission?
Absolutely.
Okay,
very much
so.
So.
Make sure I'm on point. Mm-hmm.
So before we conclude for today, though, I had a couple of follow-up questions just on the central topic of our conversation for today, if you don't mind. And there was a really great line in Bloods, and you said, "War is prison. War is prison too," is what you said.
Yeah, war is prison too.
What do you mean by that?
You cannot get out of it unless it's over with. You know what I mean? There's no way. War is prison, meaning that you are confined to the dictates of those higher authorities above you. If they say run up, charge that hill, you charge the hill. And see, let me digress a little bit about that concept. That was a concept I used to end up in the recon platoon. So when I get to Vietnam, everybody, it was like 67 was on fire. I'm in LZ. I'm in LZ Montezuma, which is in the Central Highlands, and they was assigning us to the line companies. And then the word came down that one of the platoon, the recon platoon of the 25th Infantry Division. I was in the 1st Division at the first when I came to Vietnam, not the 1st Cavalry when I first came to Vietnam. 1st Cavalry, not the 1st Division. And when the word came down to us that they need replacement in the recon platoon that had got overran, I raised my hand. I said, I'll go, because I wanted to have some input into my life, or whether or not I'm going to risk my life for this or that in a reasonable sort of way, in a military war sort of way too, And so that was the best decision I made. I felt for myself, because as I entered the platoon, the first thing they gave me a choice of walking point or the machine gun. I took the machine gun. And but it was only 8 men I had to deal with. I had to deal with a whole, because while it was like 24, 28 man platoon, but we all worked separate a lot of the times. We go out in the field together as a platoon, and then we separate and then come back together sometimes. And so My position was that was the best decision I could have made because I had some say so on whether or not we're going to go or not go up that hill and how we're going to go up that hill if we go, you see? And so that's that type of thing, you know?
It
And
sounds like you're reclaiming agency over your life and your body.
look at that's what I did in my first day over in Vietnam. I said, man, I'm not gonna stay in this line coming. I don't have no say so. They gotta tell me charge. I'm gonna have to charge that hill, and I don't want to do that all the time. And so I just when they told me that they needed replacements for the recon platoon, I raised my hand. Folks thought I was crazy, but that's where I went, and I
I'm hearing
survived.
reoccurring themes about that. That seems to relate to your time in prison. Whenever you're trying to reclaim your time and
You're talking too
get a
low.
better job, and like whenever you were in prison, you were also trying to reclaim your body and your
Yeah,
time
you have to
by getting
claim
a
your
job.
agency, man. As a human being, as a man, as a veteran, a war veteran, combat veteran, you got to claim your agency. There's there's a distinction in the agency between a combat veteran and a regular administrative veteran, a veteran who worked in administration. There's a clear distinction in that, and everybody knows that, and they respect that. Those of us who experienced the military, and those
Ari,
people.
do you think that there's a relationship between military and prison life?
Say it again.
Do you think that there's a relationship between military and prison life?
Sure, absolutely. You know, you got to follow the orders of the authorities. You got to do that, or you find yourself in a rougher, a tougher place. And while I found myself in a tougher place before for a while, I decided that hey, look, you can't continue to work against yourself. All right, and so I saw what was going on in the prison. I started to develop me a program. I developed the Incarcerated Veterans Assistance Organization. 25% of the population in Lawton Reformatory at that time, 1969 through 76, were veterans, Vietnam veterans. And so then I knew that we could come together and have an impact on that prison. And our coming together as veterans inside the prison, we brought in all the education institutions. We brought in the apprenticeship training programs where veterans can receive their benefits. So that was major. That was a major piece of work there.
I have just one final question for today. And I'm curious if you think that there's a relationship between trauma and incarceration.
I think if you spend 7 days in any jail cell, just only 7 days, you'll see the difference, the trauma. And, all right, but yeah, give me your question again if I lost it.
Yeah, well, it's pretty open ended. Just do you think that there's a relationship between trauma and incarceration?
Yes, you find trauma almost any place where there's stress, and stress is the lower level of trauma. It's the beginning of trauma. Let me put it that way. It's the beginning of trauma. That's how I understand it. So if you don't deal with the stress that people are dealing with, that they are experiencing, they're going to turn into trauma. It's going to become very traumatic. You're going to have people shooting their wives, domestic violence, all that type of stuff. You're going to have people, veterans doing anything to survive. You see? And so there is that connection between trauma, prison, and the military. That even a person who had not had the military experience is traumatized in prison. You see, there's stress. And then if you don't deal with that stress or confront that stress, it becomes trauma. And the trauma is very debilitating, you see, inside of a prison because you have really no resources available to go to help you deal with that. In respect to Vietnam veterans, we came home with a lot of trauma. We came home with a lot of stress, you see, and back into a social domain that was on fire in all the major cities. So that just triggered everything. It triggered the trauma from our stress to trauma, And so that experience inside of a confined area like prison in the general population of people, of men, then you're going to be traumatized because the administration going to tell you what to do, when to do it, and how to do it, and what you're going to eat, and how, that type of thing, what you can have and not have, and all that type of stuff. So that's trauma. That's stress. And so it turns into trauma when you don't deal with it. You don't try and remove that which is bringing about the stress. right? And so it turns into trauma. And from trauma, it comes into anything may happen. That domestic violence, that I don't give a damn about myself anymore, so I'm going to lay on the street. I'm just going to be homeless. And sometimes that is done by a decision of the individual. Sometimes I know that because I serve veterans. I understand. I provided service and assistance to veterans ever since I've been out of prison, ever since come out of the military. And so you just got to give attention. You got to give space to that, space to the stress. If you don't do that, you don't give space to the stress, meaning engage in it, talk about it, experience it, sharing experiences, then it's going to turn to trauma because you're not going to be able to handle the dynamics of family life, the workplace, if you haven't handled your stress. That's acknowledging your stress and having others to acknowledge it before it turns into trauma. And that's what really brought the whole issue of PTSD to the forefront, that we emphasize the stress and trauma that veterans experience coming home, just trying to re-socialize. Nobody really, in fact, before we even left, they hated us. And that type of thing. So we came back, they hated us. And so we had to deal with that in our respective communities, and that happens to be different resources in the various communities, right? And so in the Black community, it really wasn't a lot of mental resources available, psychological resources available, In fact, many of us was in denial about the stress. You see? Look, I didn't apply for my veterans benefits until 10 years ago.
That's
And I knew
amazing
I
to
had
me.
PTSD, but I was managing it by developing programs, serving and assisting veterans, listening to veterans, and those types of things. I took that approach to manage my stress, you see, of helping other veterans, you see. And so that I'm just thankful for my family to have grow me up that way, raise me that way, that you always look out for your friend, you see.
It
And those
sounds like
Mhm.
it sounds like you've transformed all the hardships in your life to service other people. It sounds like while you're helping all these other veterans get their benefits, you didn't get them yourself. And it sounds
I
like
sacrificed myself a great deal. It wasn't until 10 years ago that I applied for my benefits.
wow,
10 years ago.
that's
And somebody had
amazing.
to kick me in the butt to do that. In fact, I was in the congressman's office, Joe Sistak, and his media director, his director of his campaign, he was a Navy veteran. The president of our organization, not incarcerated, Point Man Soldier Heart Ministry, he had gotten his benefits, and they come to me. They turned around to me and said, "Ari, you getting any benefits?" I said, "No, I haven't applied." They said, "What?" And they gave me oh man, they drilled me. They like kicked me in my butt. Just drill down and said, "What the heck? You got to be crazy. Why? Why haven't you?" I said, "I had no need for them right at the moment." He said, "But that's your property." And so once that, I couldn't get out. I couldn't leave the office without making a commitment that I apply for my benefits. And I did. I received my VA benefits within 9 to maybe 13 months. It was a very short span of time because I was an advocate, right in Philly. I was living in Philly at the time, as I'm doing now. And so, the VA was aware of my voice, you see. And I know when my case came up against the pension and benefits panel, I was fortunate to have a woman who also happened to be a Quaker. And she understood the relationship of the social relationships a little bit better, the racial relationships a little bit better than the first guy I had. And we just didn't get along, so I ended up with another representative. And so she respected that, wrote it up exactly as I told my experience was. I had to fight 2 wars, one against the Vietnamese and one against racism in the military. And that's what she did. I said, "Look, I want to stop talking to you if you can't do it, because that's what happened to me. I'm clear about that." And she wrote it up just as that, and then I'm now 100%.
Well, Ari, you are a trailblazer. You are a path breaker,
If nothing else,
and
if nothing
and
else, man.
I really appreciate your advocacy. And I know that I've talked to at least 60 other veterans who are deeply
60,
appreciative.
60, you say?
Yeah,
All right.
of veterans who've benefited very directly from the advocacy that you did, even though you
Sure.
never met them,
No,
they
right.
never met you, but they were able to apply for and get disability benefits because of the work that you did 40 years ago.
Yes.
And so on behalf of them, I want to thank you. I want to thank you again for sharing part of your story with me today. And I want to stick around because we need to schedule a follow-up interview because your story is not over yet.
Okay, my friend. Appreciate it. Take a deep breath on that one. Appreciate you
Yeah.
saying so and sharing that information.
Absolutely. I'm gonna pause the interview for today, and then we can talk about a schedule.
Okay,
But
good stuff.
again, I do want to thank you
Hey,
for
man. Look, we
your
appreciate you,
work.
man. I appreciate you for responding to, I think it was Richard Brookshire that you met. And thank you for your response. Thank you for your commitment to get the story out about veterans in prison and what happened to us in that whole process of readjustment from war, you know?
Well, since you brought it up, I do have one final question for you, and it's something that I've grappled with for the past 5 or 6 years, and that this is an important story. This is historically very important, and yet most people don't know about it. Why do you
They
think
don't
that
care
is?
about it. They don't care. Look, if they're not experiencing, you know, they're not experiencing, so they don't have no connection to that other experience. All right. So if there's no veteran in their family, then there's no connection. If there's no heart of justice in them, then there's no connection. See the wrong that's happening to veterans in the society. And so my thing is, my experience with being in the military, being incarcerated as a veteran, I began to use my agency as a veteran in the society to be able to be acknowledged, appreciated, and respected. And I did that because if nothing else, this society really respects its veterans. You can see it everywhere. They don't do it in. There's a lot more they can do, of course. I'm not saying that the work is done. There's a lot more they can do, but they do respect their veterans, and I use that to become aware of myself, to gain resources, to help others, because I experienced the same thing they did in war. I can't leave my nobody on the field. I can't leave my friends on the field. I don't do that. I wasn't raised that way. I'm the seventh son of 8 boys and 2 girls. So I had all those brothers over top of me. And they raised me right. You don't leave your friends on the front line in danger if they're your friend. And so you come to the aid as best you can, any way you can. And that's me. I raised my children that same way.
Right on. That sounds like a really great concluding point. So again, I want to thank you again.